Welcome to
Sure.
this week's episode of Bird Brain. Today, I'm joined by Stu. Do you want to tell people why you're on the podcast and how you know me?
Known you for like 25 years or so maybe now. So yeah, we've been friends a long time and you have asked me a few times to be on the podcast and I've wanted to and yeah, happy to be here. So I love talking about animals and culture, so yeah,
Yeah,
happy to be here.
I think it's a really good point, and I like it that you've been honest about it. I have asked you multiple times. Hosting a podcast is a really weird thing because obviously, if you're the host of a podcast, you're really passionate about it. You're probably also quite extroverted and you're easily excitable. Despite the fact that I have all those qualities, it doesn't mean that all my friends are going to want to get on board. And I totally understand that. But there's a reason that I kept pestering you. So, for our listeners, Stu and I were taking part in an online podcast club for a little while. So, Stu is living in Scotland and I am in South Wales. And so, despite the fact we've been friends for a long time, it's obviously not that easy for us to get together. So, we were online with a couple of other friends discussing podcasts. I love doing podcast club with you because you, like you said, are really interested in culture. My background is actually in cultural studies, and I just think it's a topic that never gets boring. The conversation about culture cannot ever be static. It's just an impossibility. And I think that that's something that's so wonderful about it. And having a jumping off point like a podcast is such a safe sort of way, especially in such a divided world. Like, you don't want to be talking to your friends in an echo chamber, saying the same things on repeat. And especially since the pandemic, and the state of the world and the political climate, it is actually very easy to get lost in that, repeating back the same thing and feeling a bit hemmed in, having nowhere to go. And I think by having a jumping off point of a podcast, you can avoid that. You can focus on a slightly different area and it pushes that boundary of what you might expect in that conversation. And I just loved being on the calls with you. You get into the meat of the issue. And I think that that is going to make you a great guest. And due to my poor phrasing, this is a good way of asking you, tell us something about yourself and why it would be a poor choice for me to talk about the meat of the topic.
Um so I suppose one thing about me is I've been vegan 10 years now, so I've been vegetarian my entire life. It was a big part of my life because even being vegetarian, even back then in the sort of early 90s, people would challenge you on it, and you would constantly have to think about your principles. And yeah, I very much have always had that. Um, yeah, animals have always been a big part of my life, and I've always struggled with how society views animals differently, and yeah, some for entertainment, some for comfort, and some for consumption. And it, yeah, very much still something I struggle with.
Part of the reason I wanted to do this series, I've mentioned a lot in other episodes, I want that democratization of the voices that are talking about nature, and I can talk about the intersections of the fact that I'm from the working class or that I'm queer or that I'm neurodivergent. But I think a massive part of the conversation needs to also be about, you've mentioned it, the commodification of nature. And I think talking about animals through the lens of pop culture allows space for that conversation to be had with people being a little less defensive. Like, it is interesting to pose to people the question of, why is it that we can so wholeheartedly love a character, an animal character, to the extent where that people argue online? They argue online where there's a new adaptation, and Disney's rife with this in any of these live action remakes. This character shouldn't look like this, shouldn't be changed. This needs to be true to this. Like, people feel really strongly about animal characters, and yet that doesn't always translate into real life. And I think sitting with that can be an uncomfortable thing. The fact that I host a podcast about birds and I would say I'm a bird lover, and I am a meat eater, it's an uncomfortable truth. And I think that it's something that people do need to sit with rather than just getting defensive and immediately discounting the fact that those two things don't actually sit well together and leaning into what's happening there. There tends to be an avoidance or a diplomatic, oh, well, we just got to agree to be different. But I think progress is sometimes made by saying, no, what we need to agree to do is maybe just talk about the issue a little bit more and unpick what's going on. And so I'm excited to have you as a guest because obviously that's something that's difficult to do with somebody that isn't your friend. Whereas when somebody's your friend, there is that safety in you're assuming they're not judging you. Yeah. So anyway, that's just a point that is probably going to come up as we're chatting. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we've set out some of the thematic things for this episode, which I think is really nice, but we've got to go to the important bit, and I'm going to let you do the unveiling. Can you please tell me who is the character of this episode, where they come from, and why you picked them?
So the character I'm going to pick is Scuttle from The Little Mermaid, and it's actually two different species if we're taking the original classic film and then the recent remake. So there's firstly a herring gull, and then more recently a Northern Gannet, and things
Yeah,
like that.
definitely. And I am so excited that we're doing Scuttle because I love Scuttle. I really, really think that his interjection in the song Kiss the Girl is one of my favorite Disney moments of all time. Since I've been doing the prep for this episode, I've just wandered around my house at various times and just been like, wow, 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 because I just love Scuttle. And it's been a real pleasure to dig into that. But also, I have a soft spot for seagulls.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons for choosing the character is how much maligned gulls are. And personally as well, I've had a close relationship because they're currently nesting on our house, and yeah, have been since we lived here. So they're all along the street here. That nearly every roof has a family of gulls on it.
So, being up and close with the life cycle, is there anything you've learned yourself from that shared experience of living alongside them?
Well, certainly how protective they are of the young, which I think is one reason why they are much maligned because you do, especially when the young are newborn, you as soon as you leave your house, you will be dive bombed quite consistently. So I saw some advice on the RSPB of like taking an umbrella, which I think is to leave the house just to sort of protect yourself.
Are they saying to take the umbrella to sort of shield yourself, or so to have it open,
Yeah,
or are they using it
I
more as like a
I don't
battle
think they
device?
I don't think they would ever like. I think it's more sort of a scare tactic from their point. And I'm certainly not an expert, but I think it just makes you feel a little bit safer.
Yeah,
Not that they're ever going to make contact. They don't get, within centimeters. It's maybe like a meter or so away. But like you do feel a little bit more protected, I suppose. But
yeah.
we did have too young die basically because
Oh,
the bird flu is quite widespread in the gull community.
it's an interesting one. I wasn't expecting you to say that they would consistently exhibit that behavior. And I was looking into this, and I thought there was a really, really interesting study done by students at the University of Exeter. So in 2019, they wrote a piece for the Royal Society of Open Science. The study is called The Effect of Human Gaze on the Foraging Behavior of Herring Gulls. And they literally found that seagulls are less likely to steal food if they're being directly watched by humans. So
Hmm.
they are aware if somebody is maintaining eye contact with them, and they will adapt their approach and become less aggressive. And it suggests that they're basically highly attuned to our body language, not just our eye contact. And they've adapted to avoid confrontation, which is why they're stealing people's chips and ice cream by stealth. It's the
Mhm.
unsuspecting person. So they literally watch us and study. So I think that that's interesting that even though they have the ability to make those tactical sort of decisions to avoid confrontation, it must be an instinctive thing that's overriding that ability once they've got young for like a certain period.
Yeah, there's certainly there is a very much like a couple of months period when it is really heightened. Like the streets around me, it's nearly every roof has gulls on. And yeah, I notice it a lot more running. I don't know whether like they see more as me more as a threat, like moving slightly quicker. I don't know, but yeah,
But yeah,
certainly
maybe
can
they
be a little
haven't
bit.
got time to decipher your intentions. They're
Yeah,
suspicious of runners.
I think we we seem to like hate birds. The most intelligent birds seem to be the most hated, I think. Like most people don't particularly like corvids and magpies and gulls. I think pigeons are pretty clever too, but yeah, and I think because it's those birds that have learned to to sort of benefit from humans the most because of their intelligence, I think, and that's why perhaps they're uh,
Yeah,
so
100%.
despised. Yeah.
I think it's a real strange arrogance of humans that we we theorized about evolution, right? We have accepted that it exists, we've discovered it, we've gone to great lengths to prove this theory. And then when we see a species evolving socially to be more successful, a lot of people resent that. And I
Hmm.
find that really bizarre. I think the urban seagulls are fascinating as well because they have literally changed their sleeping patterns to cope with human activity. So there was a great piece of research done in Germany at the Institute of Avian Research in sort of 2015. And it found that in human dominated environments, city gulls, knowing that they will have more success in scavenging in the night, started adapting to being out in the evening. And that is totally against their natural instincts, but they are responding to urban noise and they are using light pollution to their advantage and basically avoiding competition with other scavengers that would be out in the day. And they've started being more flexible about when they are scavenging from cities. And I just think that that in itself is a fascinating thing that they've done. And yeah, there's a lot of resentment for them doing it, and yet it's really clever.
I think it might say a lot about the sort of British sensibility of we seem to hate any any person or thing that does well. We want to knock them down, and maybe seagulls are
Yeah.
another victim of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, Scuttle potentially doesn't come across in the way that we know seagulls. So it's
Mm,
quite an interesting representation in the 1989 film. I mean, one big thing to consider about Scuttle from the original Little Mermaids is that urban gulls were not quite as prolific then. Like it was unusual then. Like, my dad, when he was growing up in Birmingham, he didn't see seagulls. He thought it was, when he moved here, he was like, oh, they're everywhere. He'd worked on ships, so he's used to seabirds, but they were in Cardiff because, it's a port city and they weren't in Birmingham. And obviously now we see seagulls in our cities quite commonly, even though they're landlocked because of that, the fact that they've managed to adapt so well. But I think it's interesting that in 1989, they haven't presented Scuttle in the way that a lot of people see seagulls. He's not sort of sneaky and he's not aggressive and he's not unpopular. In fact, I think what makes Scuttle such a lovely character and very in keeping with the Disney narrative is that he is loyal to Ariel throughout the film. He is her companion and he's loyal to her throughout. And so I think it's quite nice that we have a seagull character that is showing qualities that people don't tend to associate with them. But then in a way, maybe that's why people can compartmentalize it. Scuttle's nice because he's not a real seagull. He's a cartoon. He's not stealing chips. He's got no idea what's going on. And he can't really get a lot of things done off his own back. He needs a lot of support and prodding. And when he is successful, it tends to be accidental. Maybe that says something about our ego, that we can accept
Hmm.
Scuttle as a great character because he's not that clever.
Characters like, like a parrot or something, we see that those are sort of, yeah, more acceptably clever, but yeah, seagull is not so much. Historically, they have been like very well respected, especially by sort of seafarers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is pretty standard a lot of the time, isn't it? The people that are more familiar with nature, they tend to show it more respect. I mean, it's not always the case, but it is, they're not so detached from it, and they're used to it. Like, nature is a place marker for us in our lives as well. And if you're a seafarer, the habits of the birds, they tell you things, they give you information, and they also give you comfort. And yet, I suppose a lot of us that are detached from that, we don't have that nostalgia for something. Like, a lot of us see the colors change for the seasons, right? And we have a nostalgia for that, and we have this association that comes with it. But the more disconnected you are from the cycles of animals, the less maybe you notice the significance of them, whereas people at sea, they can take cues from what the birds are doing. Um,
Yeah, they're, I think, very much a link between the sort of land and sea. So I think for people fishing, the presence of seagulls would point to fish populations, and then on the way back in, the sight of gulls would mean you're close to land. So I think they were that link, which is a theme of Scuttle, I suppose. It's the link between the sort of sea and the land.
yeah, and I think what's lovely about Scuttle is that he is Ariel's link to the human world, because he can obviously traverse both spaces, her world at
Hmm.
sea and Eric's world on land. The thing that's interesting, and that I think they did really well in the live action remake, is you mentioned that they made that choice to make Scuttle a Northern Gannet. I think that was an excellent choice. I love seagulls. I adore the 1989 Little Mermaids. I don't think they could, replace Scuttle easily. But I think it was a clever choice because a gannet can actually live at sea better than a seagull, in terms of it's a diving bird. So having a diving bird that could really be immersed in that landscape more is a clever thing to do. And it especially sort of acquaints young people with a bird they might not know as well, and yet is out there facing sort of difficulties because of overfishing, etc. So I think it was a really nice touch, and it really allowed to develop that idea of Scuttle always being the link between the two realms, because obviously Flounder can't leave the sea. Sebastian does, but Sebastian's whole time on the land is an exceptionally treacherous one. He's always getting into scrapes and having to conceal himself, whereas Scuttle can be comfortable in both environments. And so I really liked that choice.
Oh well, he slash she because that's another
Yeah.
choice they did. But I think Scuttle is, from what I've read, meant to sort of symbolize the grandmother character from the book, which is like the sort of kind of like the the moral sort of theme of the book slash film. So I think Scuttle was took that role because yeah, the grandmother, Titan's mother, is not obviously not in the film.
No, not at all. I also think it's quite telling that Scuttle, I mean, hopefully this isn't ruining it for everyone. Do you know much about the actual Little Mermaid story, the Hans Christian Andersen one?
Yeah, from I not read it, but from doing research for this, I yeah, because the one thing that struck me was how different the ending is,
Yes, do you
and
want
the
to tell
ending in
everyone?
the two films is a bit different. So for the book, from what I understand it, Ariel is given a knife to basically kill Eric. Because if she's told if she does that, then she will continue to live.
Yeah.
But then she has a change of heart and doesn't, and kind of becomes, is it like sea foam? So becomes
Yeah.
like into the spirit world, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you've characterized it correctly. Ursula, or the Sea Witch, plays a much more sinister role. I mean, which is saying something because I think Ursula is really sinister. I think that she's potentially the best Disney villain. But yeah, the Sea Witch in the story, it's the same sort of path of Ariel wishes to be on the land and wishes to, marry or end up with Eric, the prince. But the key difference here is in the Disney version, they've obviously stripped out the second element of her desire. So Ariel is a much more isolated character. She does not have a single one of those supporting characters that we have, like Scuttle, Flounder, Sebastian. They just don't exist in that story. And Ariel is very isolated in the underwater world. She just doesn't, she fantasizes about being outside of it. But part of that pull is that she wants to be immortal. So this is coming down to this religious idea, really, that animals don't have souls. And so Ariel, mermaids, half fish, half human, I suppose, they don't have souls. So they become sea foam when they die. And humans, she believed, had immortal souls. So part of her desire to be human was also to have this immortal soul. But like you said, she is too attached to Eric. And when it's clear that she's not going to achieve her aim of marrying him and she's going to, forfeit her right to freedom, the Sea Witch gives that option of slaying him, and spilling his blood will allow her this, but she doesn't. And she does just become sea foam. Although I do kind of like the idea that that's a very dark theme, but I like the idea that she had to reckon with herself. She had a choice at the end. She still made a choice. So she was like an active participant, and maybe made her peace with the fact that she did not need to have immortality.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think they do sort of play with the ending in the more recent film as well, I think, don't they? Like
Yeah.
Ariel has a bit more of an active role, I suppose. She's a bit more of a sort of spectator in the first film. Like Eric and Sebastian and Flounder seem to be the ones who defeat Ursula. Who, yeah, might I say, I this was the first one I've ever saw in the cinema, and Ursula was terrifying to me. I'm guessing I would have been like 4 years old, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see it until later. I definitely watched it at home. It wasn't when I saw it at the cinema. I just adored The Little Mermaid. It's still my favorite Disney film, like animated film from my youth. Okay, because, and this is a really interesting, like, oh no, this is a really silly thing. I absolutely just loved it that Ariel had red hair. From young, I loved the playfulness of that, because so many of the princesses obviously have the nice clothes, and they look great. But I love the fact that she just had this really bright, ostentatious hair. And she was a mermaid, which was really cool. It was strange to watch the reaction when they were unveiling who was going to appear in the live action film, because I could see that it was one of those divisive things that really shouldn't have been divisive, that they were going to cast Ariel as Halle Bailey, a woman of color. And there was this, totally defunct argument about she was white in the original, and where Hans Christian Andersen is from, it would be more in keeping with tradition that she's white. I mean, she's a mermaid. it literally doesn't matter what color she is because they do not exist. But it came full circle in my mind about the attachment I had was to her red hair. And I was really interested about whether they were going to recreate the red hair or not. And then I found myself thinking the same thing. Why am I so attached to this red hair? And I think it's because for me, it was a symbol that it was more a fantasy thing. That Ariel didn't represent a pretty girl from human society. She wasn't blonde or brunette, or she wasn't even redheaded in like that, you know, natural way. She's ostentatiously bright red in a way that does not exist as a natural hair color anywhere in the world. And I thought it was nice that in the live action remake, Halle Bailey doesn't have really red hair. There's nods to it in her hair, but there are other mermaids that you see, like some of her sisters. One of them has pink hues in her hair. And what they've really gone for is those really sort of supernatural, shimmery colors on their bodies and in their sort of in their tails and their scales, that kind of iridescent shine, which you can sort of see in the animal kingdom, that gave you those links to fantasy.
Yeah, I think it was cast well. And the other thing as well with Scuttle being cast by a female as well, and it made me think how few female sidekicks there are in Disney films. I racked my brains, I couldn't think of one. They just always seem to be males, and
Yeah,
yeah,
and
and I think people were kicking off about that as well.
yeah, and it's so interesting, because why did it matter? I mean, for me, Scuttle, they're very interchangeable. Aquafina, who plays Scuttle in the new one, and then Buddy Hackett, who plays Scuttle in the original, they've got they've both got a very, very similar energy. They are real sort of voice acting character actors that people are drawn into listening to. They just have an energy about them that is immersive. Buddy Hackett's an interesting one because he religiously spoke about things that I probably wouldn't find that enjoyable. Like his shows were very heavy on the talking, about raunchy things to get a reaction from people. But it's all in the delivery with certain people. They just have a way of taking you with them. And I think that it was really lovely that to me, it didn't matter what gender, what Scuttle was, because all that mattered was it was absolutely an amazing tribute to the original with an acceptance of this isn't 1989 anymore. We can do things slightly differently and be confident that that's going to land well with a younger audience now. So like they add in the scuttlebutt song, and he didn't have that song in the original, but Lin Manuel Miranda's written it in, and as you can sort of guess, that is perfect for this generation. It's playful, it's upbeat, it's dripping with character and confidence. And I think that it's really lovely to have a sidekick that is confident without being suffocating. A lot of the tropes of sidekicks are either that they're unflinchingly loyal, often to their own detriment, being a bit put upon by the main person, or they're kind of a suffocating know-it-all that ends up, seeing it the right way. And what I love about Scuttle is that in both, there is no real journey like that for Scuttle. There's no huge character arc where he was doing this thing and then he finally gets his own way, or he saw it this way and then he had to realize he was wrong. Scuttle's so just comfortably themselves in both the old one and the new one throughout. And I think that continuity is really lovely. Just seeing that character just full of the joy of being alive is very present in both films. And I really appreciated that. And I think Aquafina nailed that in the new one.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm guessing it was done to sort of redress some kind of gender balance. But one thing I did find out is with Northern Gannets, it is the females who are primarily out of the nest, and I think the male seemed to stick. So if it was a Northern Gannet coming out to into sea, it would more likely be a female. So there is a slight added bit of realism there.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. So we've mentioned the fact that Northern Gannets, it would the majority of the time it would be the females. Hence this great choice of updating Scuttle to being a female in the live action remake. Something else to note about Gannets, which is why they are so appropriate to be this bridge between worlds, is that they are absolutely insane in terms of how they go about catching their prey. They have one of the most specialized feeding strategies in the avian world. So basically, they are plunge diving experts. And when I say this, I mean that they fold their wings back and they dive from insane heights, achieving speeds of up to 62 miles an hour before hitting the water to capture their prey. What do you think would be the kind of height that they might be entering the water from? Like, is realistic for a bird to be looking underneath the surface of the water, looking at a moving object, and then targeting it?
Oh. Yeah, it's hard to put. I guess I'd say 200 meters.
200. Okay, fine. You're ruining my facts. 200 meters high in the air. Okay. They're looking at 40 meters. Okay. And that
Okay.
is is impressive.
But I was thinking more that they were looking at a sort of a collection of fish, and they weren't actually specifically going to be focused on an individual fish, and they just knew, and then
Uh,
they could adjust their path. But if they just sort of focus in on one exact fish, then yeah, 40
oh
meters
yeah.
is impressive.
Yeah, you're absolutely not wrong because they would be clocking shoals of fish from that sort of distance. And I was thinking about this and how, right, so they're 40 meters above the water, and then they're going to accelerate within that time of hitting the water. They're going to be hitting 60 miles an hour or 62 miles an hour and above before they even enter the water. Like, that's an insane acceleration speed, right? Um, and how are they equipped to cope with that? So they've evolved this like sleek torpedo like body shape, and the point of that is to minimize drag during this rapid descent, allowing them to obviously enter the water efficiently. But I think a lot of that stuff is kind of, we assume that we see things that dive and make themselves slimline, but there's some other stuff that's just absolutely fascinating. Like, they actually have these specialized air sacs that sit beneath the skin of their face and chest. And they've got their subcutaneous air sacs, right, that act as shock absorbers. They just cushion the bird against the force of the impact when they hit the water, literally protecting their vital organs from impact. Um, they also have a reinforced skull and beak. They have this extra sort of robust bone structure and this elongated shape to withstand high impact. And then they also have forward-facing eyes for binocular vision, which provides, this excellent depth perception, which not all birds obviously have. And then they have a specific membrane, which is this transparent protective eyelid. And it basically comes into play when they hit the water. This membrane protects their eye from the impact, but also is still allowing them visibility to maintain focus on their prey. Added to that, they've got these breathing adaptations, right? And so their nostrils are sealed shut and they breathe through these specialized slits near the upper beak. And that prevents water from entering the respiratory system during a dive. And I was just thinking about that is so many things to come into play and to have evolved so beautifully to allow this bird to basically be a giant show off.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I suppose does that mean that they're more susceptible to predators with their binocular vision not having they're not quite as aware of their surroundings?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, and this is where conversations about evolution are endlessly fascinating, right? When you learn about it from a rudimentary point of view at school, I remember just getting really hung up on this idea of evolution doesn't make sense because where are the other, like, where are the half ape people? And I got hung up on that for ages because, you know, when you learn about things, you haven't got time to go into them in loads of detail. But I think the thing that will probably interest about us now about evolution to the end of our days, right, is this constant push and pull, like you've mentioned there about, yes, having this binocular vision and frontward facing eyes is exceptionally powerful for it being the predator. But from a prey perspective, no, it would be, you're right, it wouldn't be as useful for them. But this is the advantage of being a bird that can live at sea and at their colonies. So, firstly, because they are animals that nest together as well, they've got that protective kind of, you know, impact of the group, right? They've got the group to protect them. And they can form those layouts when they're nesting where there's kind of watchers, right? So there's that sort of thing. And I guess because they're hunting out at sea, what is going to be attacking them? Things from above are not really going to be attacking them very much. Although there are issues with them having sort of offshore wind farms in their flight lines. So they do struggle with those, but that's not a moving predator. So surely, you know, that's just their own stupidity. Because binocular vision or not, you should be able to see a wind farm. But you know, I'm simplifying that. Like, I don't think the issue is they're just flying directly into blades. The problem is that it's disrupting their flight path, or they're struggling to understand what, you know, how to regroup around that. But yeah, it's a really interesting point. But it's not all sort of sunshine and light when it comes to Northern Gannets. There was a really terrible sort of avian influenza outbreak in 2022, and it massively impacted Northern Gannets. In fact, I was thinking about how pertinent it was that you were my guest when we're going to talk about the impact specifically on Scottish colonies. I'm just
Yes, good. Well, we had gulls on our roof which had avian flu as well, so I knew that they did affect sort of, yeah, seabirds.
So when we're talking about avian influenza, what I'm going to be focusing on is particularly today is the highly pathogenic avian influenza, which is, you know, HPAI. So this emerged as a significant threat to northern gannets and other seabirds. So, like I mentioned, in 2022, there was this unprecedented outbreak, though, which absolutely decimated gannet populations across the whole of the North Atlantic. But specifically, Bass Rock in Scotland has one of the largest northern gannet colonies. So it hosts an estimated 150,000 birds there. And this outbreak was so catastrophic that 50% of the birds were wiped out. It's really, really tough because obviously there's strength in numbers until you have a virus like this. Because in colonies, it's just absolutely unavoidable. It spreads primarily through direct contact between the birds, contaminated water, or, you know, the shared nesting grounds because of fecal matter, saliva, and respiratory secretions that all are common transmission pathways for the virus. So the higher the density of the nesting in gannets, the swifter facilitation it is of spreading the virus. And it's particularly nasty because infected birds are, you know, were showing neurological symptoms, really terrible lethargy, making it unable for them to like go and get food. And they're also clearly dying suddenly, if not in this protracted way. But I found it really interesting to observe the fact that we are now responding to these things. So in the UK, wildlife rehabilitation centres have adopted these really strict protocols. So there's this initial triage outside premises now. So they literally started using PPE, segregating birds into quarantine for up to 14 days. And, you know, big shout out to centres like the Scottish SPCA, National Wildlife Rescue Centre, which totally revised all of its operations to avoid handling highly susceptible species during peak outbreaks to mitigate the risks. There's a really interesting focus on centres using this enhanced drainage systems. They're doing all these disinfectant foot baths, strict waste management strategies to limit virus spread. And I think it's really heartening to notice that places are trying to work out if we're going to be involved in protecting species, or if we're going to be involved in taking in sick birds, what can we do to make sure that we're actually helping the population? Because obviously you want to protect the individual bird, but there are ways of doing that without just bringing it into, you know, a center and therefore spreading other things. So I found that really interesting. And I also really liked the fact that, you know, there's other things they're doing. So there's lots of drone population studies at the moment, and drones are basically equipped with thermal cameras, and they're being used to assess colony sizes without disturbing the birds. And that's providing sort of crucial data on mortality rates during outbreaks. I think it's really important because otherwise it can obviously be downplayed, the severity of things. So having this non-intrusive method of sort of gauging the populations in areas is really useful.
Yeah, I think, and well, one thing I would add about that is that how much responsibility the animal agriculture industry should take with like these, cramming so many chickens into large spaces, and then I think viruses like that get a chance to, propagate and develop, and then it's the other birds then that it spreads to, and yeah, I think more focus needs to be put on that, I think. It's my vegan 2 cents worth anyway.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up because what are the big factors in initiatives not being put into place? Are there initiatives that are put in place that are just not followed, or are there not regulations on this, or is there not enforcement of regulations? Is there just no will? Like, what do you see as the barriers here?
Um, I think there's not very good regulation as far as I'm aware. Um, and I think the practices as well. Uh, I think it's very much seen as treating the animals essentially as, just like an item in a factory. Like as long as it doesn't get damaged and we can make money off it, it doesn't really matter. So, they use a hell of a lot of antibiotics and things like that, which is one reason why levels of antibiotics are actually dangerously low across the world, because the animal agriculture industry just pumps animals full of antibiotics to sort of try and ward off diseases. But then I think it can lead to like viruses propagating a bit more. But
Mm. Have you, obviously, you live by your values by being a vegan. Have you ever done any sort of volunteer work, or I don't know this about you, or any activism, or been involved in any research where these sort of ideas are being supported, or you've worked sort of firsthand with it?
no, I haven't. I see activism going on, and like the people putting themselves in danger and things, and it is, yeah, I take my hat off, and it's incredibly courageous. But it's, yeah, something I have considered, but because I think a lot of it goes unseen, and it's only when people are actually shown what goes on, that they, yeah, I think they say, if abattoirs had glass walls, then no one would eat meat. But yeah,
That's it. I've never heard that before. That's a
I don't know
very
who said that, but
great phrase. I mean, it's also stands to reason that that's probably true too. In terms of corporate responsibility, actually, this is probably a great time to mention Disney. So, first off, Stu, come on, throw the gauntlet down. What is your view of Disney as a corporation? And do you think it does more harm or good?
Like any multinational corporation, probably more harm than good, but you can see, you know, the I don't know, that hard intangible sort of wonder that it can instill in children, that it did in me, I can say, when I was a child. And you see these films, and they realize your dreams and things like that. But then, yeah, I don't know a huge amount of what goes on behind the scenes at Disney, but I know, sort of to start with, there was some, back in the, early days of Disney, there was quite a lot of pretty bad stuff going on. And then, yeah, in recent years, like this sort of perhaps lack of representation, which they are addressing in this film a little bit. But yeah, what's your views on the matter?
Well, I think that a lot of things that have a profound impact on children are they're up and down, aren't they? Like, yes, school and family, but a lot of cultural things are based on your location or they're fads. But Disney has been impacting every generation since our grandparents' generation, and that's quite a consistent impact to be having. So I feel like it's reasonable to have baseline expectations that are rooted in morality, even though they are just meant to be a source of entertainment. Um, that's my stand on it. And I was thinking about, but what does that mean? Like, what is the baseline of what I would expect from Disney? And you've already touched on one of them. Well, they cater to children all over the world, and they make money from children all over the world. So therefore, their representation needs to be better. I think that's something they are working on, and that's good. But I think that there are other things as well. Like obviously, you've got sustainability and things, but the fact that they have so much merch and they've got the parks. So there's those sort of things too. But yeah, I think it's a big question. If you had a baseline expectation apart from the things we've already mentioned, is there anything else you'd throw into the ring of like, come on, we should be able to expect this of a company of this size, reach, and I guess how established it is? Because with Disney, they can afford to take risks, right? There are some companies that, yes, maybe they boom, but they might be, boom and then burst, or but this is like an established company.
Yeah, I think, and you can see from the, like, Pixar, they deal with some quite interesting sort of philosophical issues, and life and death and things like that. So I think it's shown that you can deal with, still make a really entertaining and successful film, and yeah, deal with important issues. And yeah, perhaps the sort of your typical Disney films could start to look at more, yeah, interesting world issues, I suppose. Yeah, things like environmentalism, or yeah.
Okay, I love that. So yeah, because this is the thing thematically. Okay, what are your themes in the next 5 years? If you could have a say, what do you think the kind of themes they could be tackling would be to really add value and to, be progressive?
Yeah, I suppose, like, climate change, but you just worry about, or dread, like, what a Disney climate change film would be, and it would just be greenwashed and things. Like, what would it actually look like to be a film that is honest? And I think they would have to, work with, stakeholders who are very clued up and knowledgeable on the matter, and rather than just, oh, we're going to have a little nod to this and just be your typical Disney film, and just, yeah.
I mean, I definitely think that's possible though. I think there are so many like influencers, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory way. I'm saying there are influencer activists from younger generations from across countries and cultures that could be really good stakeholders in this, that they understand and they've made their name through media for a start. So they're savvy enough to understand that things need to be relatable and broken down, but they haven't diluted their sort of aims and they've connected with people because young people actually notoriously do care, you know? So I don't think it would be impossible. I would like to see if they did that, that they sort of sought the advice of people in the field and activists from whatever location they were purporting to be in. Like obviously if you're set in a fantasy location, then that's different. But yeah, it would be really cool to get people that were ideally suited to understanding the unique challenges of that area too. I think that would be great. Any other things on your
And
wish list?
well, I think it sort of part of that is one of the big things with and another thing to sort of criticize Disney on is its sort of lack of representation and dealing with other cultures um and how they could tie that in because an issue with climate change is how it disproportionately affects lots of the certain communities in vulnerable countries. So that's another way that they could, look to sort of tie that into a potential film, I suppose.
Yeah, and actually, it's really interesting because I was thinking this a lot about Halle Bailey being in this film because I read an article and it's really bothered me. It's an amazing article in Glamour magazine. It's written by a lady called Nylah Burton, and the tagline is "I'm begging people to be normal about the Little Mermaid." And she made the point that Marcus Ryder, who's a British campaigner, he's the chair of the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, really interesting figure. He said that he liked the movie, but followed it up with, look, due to the fact that it's set in the 18th century Caribbean and Bailey's romantic interest is a white man, that the film should have explored slavery. And he literally said, I do not think we do our children any favors by pretending that slavery didn't exist in his own blog titled Disney's Little Mermaid, Caribbean Slavery and Telling the Truth to Children. And he followed that up with setting the fantastical story in this time and place is literally the equivalent of setting a love story between Jew and Gentile in 1940 Germany and ignoring the Jewish Holocaust. I mean, I I was really staggered when I read that and was like, oof, I don't think that's fair, actually. Yeah, so I think that Marcus Ryder's point is a really interesting one, but I found myself thinking that like the writer Nylah Burton, she said that there's something really uncomfortable and profoundly unfair to put on Halle Bailey, and in fact, any of the little black children that might be going to see the film, that they are not allowed to be part of something just uncomplicated, playful, frivolous, if you like. Instead, he's kind of suggesting that if you're going to include a black actor and if you're going to set it in the Caribbean in a real place, then you need to lean into essentially generational trauma and colonization, and that this is exceptionally problematic considering how much racist abuse Bailey already experienced just for being cast. And I thought this is a really difficult thing, isn't it, to grapple with? You're again putting a lot of a burden, and essentially it's emotional labor, isn't it, on this young black actor and saying, well, if you're going to spearhead this, almost like to spearhead it properly and talk about something important. But the film isn't meant to be about something important. And the 1989 version wasn't meant to be about something important. In fact, it was so unimportant that that's why people have probably been so obsessed about Ariel having red hair. And that was one of my big takeaways from it. That story is just, about some fun characters that maybe shouldn't fall in love with that person. Like, you know, the idea that she had to take that burden seems exceptionally unfair. And I thought that it was a really interesting article. And my favorite line in it is, it is depressing, the theft of these small joys. That, there was this real tussle between people wanting to somehow hold this live action remake to a standard of the 1989 animated version and make sure that Ariel was presented in this ridiculous way. But there was also this unfair weight of But if you're going to do it, make sure you're using it as a platform when really it's not meant to be a platform for anything. And in fact, the representation is just allowed to be in the diversity of who was cast. So yeah, I just thought that was an interesting take on where does responsibility lie? Because I guess if Disney took full corporate responsibility in a way to make everything, I don't want to say PC because that's really dismissive. Like representation and stories of depth matter, and they matter to me a lot. But there is this idea of where does the weight have to be though, and who has to bear it, because what you don't want to start seeing is that the Disney films where a lot of your cast are white, they just get to be fun. They just get to be these fun jaunts into, with great songs and amazing costumes. But then people from minorities or people of color are expected to somehow heft something of worth, you know?
Yeah, I suppose it speaks to just a wider issue that we don't deal enough with these issues, but it it is unfair to, like you said, to put this on this particular film, maybe. But then, yeah, that argument that it's it's just take it as a face value is often put forward disingenuously when things are like they probably should do more. But maybe in this case, then yeah, that step forward in terms of representation is a good thing and should be celebrated. But yeah, it could still bring about a conversation about, and that's maybe what it's done as well. To be honest, like that, the original film, if it wasn't for Sebastian's accent, I would not have a clue where that film, apart from being underwater, where was it meant to be? Where was the land? I wouldn't have been able to say it was the Caribbean, really. But I suppose they make a bit more of it in the remake.
Yeah, they do. I think it boils down to as well. My age-old argument is always, but maybe it's not just who's involved in the storytelling, and maybe it's not about how much can we push this story. Maybe there's a bigger conversation that should be going on about why are we only commissioning these comfortable stories? Because, the 1989 Little Mermaid's a great film. You could argue that we didn't need another one at this time. And what we could have done was we could have gone for a story written from a different perspective in the first place. We could have been commissioning a story by newer, exciting voices that are pushing something, whereas trying to shoehorn in a message into something where it didn't exist, or it impacts too much on the comfort that people have for this nostalgic thing, which is the reason they're engaging with it anyway, isn't really the important thing. It's why aren't we commissioning different stories anyway, where those things
Yeah,
are.
I think that ends up becoming like a feedback loop because no, the sort of it's just constantly rehashing because that's what is safe and that's what will, get people into the cinema. So just the cycle just continues and it's so hard to get fresh ideas out there when, yeah, the sort of film industry is just so focused on like, there's so much money is invested, like they have to make their money back.
Talking about money, do you know much about Disney's philanthropic efforts?
I didn't up until recently, but in the sort of lead up to recording this, it's something that I discovered that they do have a sort of charity arm which focuses on various projects. Um, and yeah, the figure of the total donated since it was set up does seem fairly paltry, and when it's linked to a sort of such a sort of behemoth like Disney, I think it was 125 million dollars since it got set up in, was it the early 90s?
In 1995? I actually think that's a shameful figure. I I got to be honest, I did not expect that to be that low. The 2023 remake of The Little Mermaid, so it grossed approximately $569 million globally. So from its domestic market in the US and Canada, that it made 298 million. But then it is crazy because despite this huge revenue, it it had this massive $250 million production budget, and they spent $140 million on marketing. So they needed 560 million to make it profitable. Well, they've donated less since 1995 than they spent just marketing this remake.
It's basically just a sort of it's a token gesture and just the epitome of greenwashing, I think, because they're probably executives see it as a financially beneficial decision to invest that money because it makes them look like a better company, so which will make people, more likely to go to their parks and watch their films. So they just see it as an investment in their own company, rather than actually doing anything good.
Yeah, and the website's great as as you would expect. The website is really fun to engage in, so I urge people that are listening, go and look at the Disney Conservation Fund website, because what it does is it gives you this map and it shows you the different funds that they've supported. Strikingly, it doesn't tell you the volume of money they've donated to each one, but it flags them. And what is nice to see is that there is this really lovely global distribution. It's not really disproportionately in one area, so that's really nice. But this idea that the fund focuses on protecting wildlife and ecosystems, engaging communities in conservation efforts, and providing education about biodiversity, I mean, I would say that by the look of it, what they actually do is map it on their website, make it look pretty, make sure that you're flooded with these names of things that look like they're involved in lots of stuff, but then they give you very little feedback on what they've actually provided and also what the outcomes of that have been, right? Which is a kind of missed opportunity. And in terms of sincerity, I mean, money going somewhere is better than it not going there at all. But I did find myself thinking, just like you said about greenwashing, it does seem that they pick and choose when to highlight this. So in 2019, when they were releasing the live action Lion King, the Disney Conservation Fund went hard on promoting the fact that they'd collaborated with the Lion Recovery Fund. And they had this mission to inspire audiences to help double the population of lions by 2050. And I thought that this was nice that they did that. But I did think, but if it was genuine, why was the same not applied with the Little Mermaids? Because they have collaborated with the Marine Conservation Society, and that focuses on obviously protecting marine biodiversity in UK waters, including all those areas frequented by seabirds like Northern Gannets. And so that grant that they've given them might not directly address gannets, but it is about protecting marine habitats, which benefits the whole ecosystem that gannets depend on. But they haven't chosen to foreground that. And they haven't chosen to, let people know that maybe you could know more about this. But when it came to the Lion King, they did want to have a call to action.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of one of the pitfalls for lots of environmentalism, and that we like the poster things like the lion and the panda and things, but yeah, lots of other creatures and habitats get sort of forgotten about because they're not as sexy as the sort of well, the panda is the perfect example of that, I think.
Yeah. And, have you seen all the stuff about what is it, the Moodang? Little weird hippo thing?
Oh yeah.
I'm very uncomfortable with. It's just because it's cute and a bit weird. It's not like it shouldn't really have a more inherent value than something else.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with philanthropy generally is like money doesn't often we don't generally give any more or less to charity as a sort of society. It just gets directed to different places. So if one charity gets more money, then another charity is going to get less. I think we don't really see it very holistically, and then because of that, lots of things get forgotten about that. And yeah, like lots of branches of environmentalism are just yeah not funded properly.
And I get that, like you mentioned, people have this idea of what's a sexy animal to like focus on, and what's gonna get people's heartstrings being tugged. And I guess we've already lamented the fact that people don't seem to have that emotional inclination towards seagulls. And maybe, this insane dive bombing gannet with a weird membrane over its eye that is basically a precision killer. Maybe that's also not as lovable. Why, when lions are lovable and they stalk and tear apart their prey are lovable, I don't know. But I guess lion cubs are super cute. And they don't have weird eyes. Ooh, Gannet's eyes, actually. Do you know anything about Gannet's eyes?
Not more than you've just mentioned.
I totally forgot to mention this, and I really like this. So I already mentioned about, their binocular vision, but they also have a really, really a nice nod again to evolution. So juveniles' eyes, they initially have dark colored eyes, and this makes it less conspicuous against their fledgling plumage. So I guess we're hoping that it's sort of serving as a camouflage, reducing predation in the vulnerable early life stages, because they are preyed upon, sadly, by larger gulls or skewers
Mm.
or eagles. So this is interesting because the original Scuttle might have considered eating a baby gannet. But also, I thought about what you said about are you more likely to be preyed upon? But eagles also have binocular vision and forward-facing eyes. So, anyway, but I was mentioning the fact that they have these dark-colored eyes as juveniles. As they mature, their eyes transition to that vivid pale blue that they're famous for, that's encircled by this black ring. And the black ring further enhances that contrast. And this transition typically coincides with their progression to their adult plumage. So it takes 2 to 3 years. And it's when they start participating with courtship and breeding as well. So there's an argument that it's about protecting them, but it's also about sending a visual signal that this this individual has reached sort of sexual maturity. I thought that was really fascinating. And that apparently structural changes in the iris and shifts in pigmentation is not that uncommon in birds. And these are hormonally regulated and linked to their sexual maturity. So I
Oh,
thought that was
that's
my,
an interesting one.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, just a little side note about this. Oh, I can't remember what my main point was because I went off on my side note about their eyes.
Scuttle's
Um,
got the blue eyes then, so
yeah,
in
yeah,
there. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, because Scuttle is definitely a full-blown adult, even though
Adult.
they
Yeah.
don't know anything about anything. Um, yeah. Oh, are there any? Do you like the way that Scuttle speaks, or the language that Scuttle uses?
What, and like across both films, it was
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a bit like that kind of childlike thing, isn't it? That they children speak with such confidence about something, even if they're not sure on it. And I think it's quite endearing, really. Yeah, because
Oh,
it's not harmful.
yes. And actually, you're right, because there's this line, right? That it's Scuttle that breaks it to Ariel that Ursula is, marrying Eric. And Scuttle actually says, "Have I ever been wrong?" And there's this obviously comedic moment where we've only ever seen Scuttle be wrong the whole way through the film. They've said that, a fork that Ariel is using to brush her hair is called a dingle hopper. We've watched Scuttle be wrong the whole way, and this line, this kind of self-awareness is but very childlike, right? About, yeah, but I'm still involved, and I think that that's nice. But yes, so Scuttle, I think that Scuttle as a character is quite bombastic in a way. Lovable, but often not achieving anything, right? Just kind of like being noisy, getting in the way. But when I looked into Scuttle a bit further, I found it really fascinating that in the original animated version, he's voiced by Buddy Hackett. And Buddy Hackett was a well-known comedian with a distinctive voice and style of delivery. He already had this natural comedic timing and a talent for improvisation. And that's what helped shape Scuttle's quirky, lovable character. He was even described as performing Scuttle, and I love this. He was described as performing Scuttle as a nerve damaged vaudevillian. Um, he basically just ad-libbed his whole way through his voice sessions. And I have a fondness for this because Robin Williams was meant to have done the same when he voiced the genie as well. And I think this is something I like, the fact that Disney would give some creative license to a lot of these side characters, especially the comedic characters. They would intentionally get comedians involved to see if they could push the direction and give this more this full character. Anyway, what I did think was interesting though is that in the 1950s, so way before he was involved with this, he was making $3,000 a week as a comedian. He was selling out places like Prestige Rooms. And by 1959, on The Tonight Show, he actually said that his popularity was down to the fact that I come across as a cartoon and not a person. And I thought that was quite a sad thing to say about yourself. But when you look into it, animators have openly admitted that they deliberately gave Scuttle exaggerated facial expressions to match Buddy Hackett's voice acting. And they said that his wide eyes, the crooked beak, his over-the-top gestures, they were all designed to amplify Hackett's comic delivery. And that it was a joyful process to match his larger-than-life personality with Scuttle's eccentric animation. And I was thinking, like, his larger-than-life personality. So when I looked into it, he was wild, right? So he was opening at the King's Castle Hotel in Lake Tahoe, right, at the casino, and in defiance of an exec asking him to tone down his raunchy act that night because the resort owner was going to be there with his wife, Hackett was like, okay, and he didn't tell a single dirty joke. But for his entire set, he stood on stage completely naked and just covered his private parts with a silver dollar. So yeah, he sounds like he couldn't be told.
That's, yeah, quite sort of anti-establishment.
Yeah, and I was thinking he was doing that in the late 50s and then the early 60s, and then he was cast in this in 89, so he was known to be sort of kind of rogue and do what he wanted.
And was he kind of a bit over the hill by that point? Was it the sort of the casting at the Little Mermaid?
Yeah, maybe. Okay. Well, Stu, I'm so glad that you've been my guest today. Thank you for agreeing, and for putting up with me not really understanding how to use Zoom. Is there anything else you want to say about Scuttle, seagulls, gannets, or just Disney in general before we close?
I'm just happy to share my thoughts on some two lovely species of seabirds and perhaps point to Disney being a bit shit. But
Yeah.
it's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's been really great. Thank you.
Elliot explains. Why do seagulls live by the sea? If they live near the bay, there will be bagels.